On today's episode, we delve into the heart of Jamaica's governance challenges, with the recent findings from the Integrity Commission raising critical questions about accountability and public trust. We'll explore the implications for our political landscape. Joining us are Clyde Williams, a prominent attorney, and Germaine Barrett, a keen social and political commentator, who will be joining us a little later. Together, we'll navigate the complexities of illicit enrichment and the role of civil society in demanding transparency from our leaders. I'm Kwame Thomas, and this is The Conversation. Welcome to The Conversation. So, morning, good evening, good night, Sir Williams. How are you?
Blessed love. I'm doing fine, thanks.
A lot of things have been circulating in the public sphere, and one of the questions that I just want to jump out with, I'm looking at the findings of the Integrity Commission, and there have now been calls from the opposition, especially for the removal of the Prime Minister. Either he steps down or he calls the election now. Do you think, in light of what has been happening, that's the right call for them to be making now?
I can't comment on what the opposition, a political party, will call for. That's what political parties do. So I really have no comment on whether it's right or wrong. It's a matter for the political party to decide.
In other words, then, do you think that what they're actually doing is trying to capitalize on political misfortune, or there's legitimacy behind the call that's being made?
Well, there are always those two purposes, because you can have legitimate situations where they seek to capitalize, and they can have situations that are marginal that they seek to capitalize. So that's what political parties do. So
if you were, given that you're a prominent attorney at law, if you were the Prime Minister's lawyer, how would you advise him in this situation?
I'm not prepared to go down that road at all. I mean, the Prime Minister has high-powered lawyers, probably has on his battery cases and so forth. So I wouldn't be wanting to try to do that at all. As a member of the public, I want to focus on the things how they affect me and other members of the public. Prime Minister have good lawyers.
All right. So one of the things that we want to hammer down, though, is the report is voluminous. It's a big report, and my understanding is that it deals with a variety of issues. It's not just one thing. So could you first give us just a synopsis from it? What exactly is that report, and how should we understand it?
All right. So the report arises from the statutory declaration filed by the Prime Minister as to his assets, his liabilities, his earnings, his incomes, and so on. Every parliamentarian and every public servant has to do this annually. Specifically, it relates to a period of investigation, 2019 to 2022. All right? And the sticking point is the statutory declaration of 2021. That remains one of the sticking points. So in the investigation, there are several issues that arise. One issue is the question of the Prime Minister having bank accounts with family members and a member of his constituency.
Former member of his constituency, so that's four.
That had not been disclosed in the statutory.
Yes.
But when they wrote to third parties to get information, they realized that these accounts his name was on them. So they started that investigation as to whether or not it was a false declaration. He has been cleared of that.
Yeah.
So how it works is that there is a director of investigations who investigate. They then make a report, and in that report there will be several recommendations to the commission, the five-member commission. One of the recommendations was to prosecute, to look into whether there should be a prosecution of the Prime Minister for the false declaration.
Oh, so it's not to, let's clarify, it's not to prosecute, but to look into whether or not there's a need for that.
Because the director of elections cannot tell the director of corruption prosecutor that she should say prosecute. It is her job now, having gathered all the information, to make a ruling.
Recommendation?
Sorry?
To make a recommendation?
A ruling.
Okay.
So the director of corruption prosecution would make a ruling based on the information and the evidence given to her by the Director of Investigations. It's a separate, two separate functions. So he can't say to her.
Why two separate though?
It's important because what you don't want to do is to say, well, you're predisposed to prosecute because it's the same body doing the investigation. So they've separated it. So it's the same. So that's why you have a Director of Investigation who cannot have an interaction with the Director of Prosecution. So when he's finished, he submits his report to the commission.
Yes.
The five-member
commission.
Right, not to the director directly. That commission then decides if it must act on his recommendations. Because remember, it's the commission that is driving the process. These are its agents and servants. Yeah. So they don't have to accept, they could decide, say, no, we're not accepting this recommendation. So he recommends a referral to the corruption prosecutor to decide what to do in those circumstances. Mm-hmm. She then has ruled that there is insufficient evidence and that there is an acceptance of the explanations given to the by the Prime Minister.
So in the case of the 4 accounts then, where the Prime Minister made a statement that one was, well, 2 was survivorship reasons, and then the statement was made that there's no reason or no evidence to prosecute. Right. So he was cleared of that. So
he was cleared of that.
Okay, and the other one...
As in, remember the issue for that is that he had not disclosed it on the statutory decks, and he ought to have at least 2 of them. He ought to have at least 2 of them disclosed it. So the next question is going to be, is that a false declaration? Mm-hmm. Omissions are considered false declarations.
Because they presuppose an intent.
Yes. Well, I don't want to say that's a little bit strong, but omissions are seen as also part of false declarations. Oh. Because you could omit something with the intent to deceive, or you could innocently have omitted it.
Okay.
So they found out about those accounts when they wrote to the various banks and so forth and so on. So they write back and say, hey, what about these 4 accounts? And he provided the information and explanation, and they have accepted that. Mm-hmm. So there's no sufficient evidence to prosecute him for false declaration, false statement.
Yes.
Right. There are other issues, however, in the same report, because remember, the report is covering a period 2019 to 2022.
Yes.
So the investigation report now, there are several other issues that the investigator raises. So one of those issues is tax compliance. That's one of the issues raised by the companies that the Prime Minister is associated with.
Those are the 3 with which he's associated with?
No, these are... It's several of them. So the tax compliance relates to the following companies: Imperium, Estate Bridge, Positive Media, and Green Emerald.
Yes.
4 companies. In circumstances where these entities appear to be engaged in business activities, but they are filing nil income. So you know, it's a red flag, he says.
Help us to understand the idea of filing nil income, though, because what if your expenditure and your income are pretty much the same? Yes. You know, what does that mean?
Well, you see, the tax authorities say you must set out the thing, man. You must give us, make us see the details. But when you file nil now,
there's nothing to show.
So you must set out the details. That is the whole idea of the notion. So let me read a little bit from the report, the investigative report. The DI, that's the Director of Investigation, concludes that the filing of nil income tax returns for the years 2021 and 2022 on the part of Imperium, Estate Bridge, and Positive Media, 3 companies in this instance, in circumstances where those companies reported income and other business activities in their audited financial statements, poses significant tax compliance concerns.
So there's a dissonance there. So the auditors are saying that there's income, but they are filing nil return.
I just read it.
Go on.
I just say, so where those companies reported income and other business activities in their audited financial statements, poses significant tax compliance concerns. So they have audited statements that show these things, but nil income. And so he says, he raises this as a concern.
And this has nothing to do now with omission or anything, because it's there in the auditor's report, and you have filed nil returns. So therefore, there is definitely a dissonance between the two, because the report that you have filed to the tax authority should be saying the same thing that the auditor's report.
Well, my reports typically do that.
No, they should be saying the same thing. Go on.
All right. So that is in relation to those companies and the filing of the nil when there's, so that's tax compliance issues. There is also, so the investigator says he must, send it to the tax Commission of General Tax for assessment and so forth and so on. I'll comment on that shortly. Then there's one other issue, which is he defines it as the funding and operation of 3 companies. Having regard to the questions around the funding and operations of Positive Media, Positive Jamaica Foundation, and Green Emerald, the DI, Director of Investigations, recommends that a copy of this report be referred to FID for the necessary investigation to be concluded. The findings of the DI's investigation raises significant questions around the income-generating capacity of the reference companies relative to the funds which have been identified in their accounts.
What does that mean in regular layman's language?
The DI is saying him can't say, I have so much money in their accounts. I mean, I've identified these accounts, and these accounts have these monies, but I'm not seeing the income generating capacity.
In other words, how you get the money?
Yes,
right.
Essentially. So he said, let me read again, the findings, and this is paragraph 6, this is recommendation 6.23. The findings of the DI's investigations raises significant questions around the income-generating capacity of the reference companies, okay? Relative to the funds which have been identified in their accounts. So here is some money in some accounts, but I'm not seeing the income-generating capacity.
All right, so hold those thoughts now. We're going to our first break. Just to remind you that you're watching The Conversation, where I'm speaking with Attorney at Law Clyde Williams. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Conversation. As stated before, we would have been joined by social and political commentator Germaine Barrett. He's now with us. Welcome to The Conversation, Germaine. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, and good afternoon to your viewers.
Yes. So it's great having you on our end. What we wanted to find out, because we're trying to unpack much of what has been said, or much of what is being said, rather, about the recent Integrity Commission's report that was submitted. So one of the questions that I have is, in light of what is happening now, you are a political commentator, you have been on the ground. What is the pulse, and based on what you have been hearing, what recommendations would you have to give to the Prime Minister if you had his ear?
Well, as I move around and I interact with average Jamaicans, I mean, there's a consensus that Jamaicans are very disappointed with what they consider to be, quite frankly, a scandal that has befallen the administration. Labor rights particularly are very sad. PNP people are somewhat jubilant, but cautiously, concerned really that, even though this bodes well for their political fortunes, it doesn't do well for Jamaica and Jamaica's reputation internationally. And so, to the latter part of your question, what should the Prime Minister do? I think that the Prime Minister should seriously consider, and I'm not saying that I'm at that point where I can say definitively he should do this, but seriously he should be considering stepping aside to allow for the investigations to run its course, to allow for the office of the Prime Minister to maintain its integrity in the true spirit of the form of government that we practice, Westminster government.
All right. Clyde, what would you have to say to especially the last part of the statement that was made?
The question of whether the Prime Minister should step aside. Well, you recognize you can't step aside and then step back in. So it would have to be a resignation. There would have to be a resignation. I typically stay away from those kinds of call-ins, stay away from call-ins. I think it is a matter for the public as a whole, and if the pressures develop around that, then of course. What I will say is this, that My reading of the report and the recommendations and so on, those have left me a little concerned concerning the Prime Minister and his companies that he's associated with. I am concerned about that. So I'd want to know whether or not, for instance, the filing of the nil tax compliant, the nil return squares when a forensic analysis is done of the relevant accounts and the relevant information from Tax Administration Jamaica. I'd want to know if that is squared. I'd also want to know if when the director says there is a difference between he can't see, he's seen income, he's seen money in accounts, but he's not seeing how the activities to put those money in the account. I'd want to have that resolved.
All right, so before I head into because I originally had something else in mind, but based on what you have just said, how should we understand the concept of illicit enrichment in light of Jamaica's law?
Well, it's any kind of situation where there's a mismatch between your income, your lawful income, and your assets and your lawful income, a mismatch.
So in light of what you have just said now, especially about the companies now, the fact that there's some dissonance between how the amount of money that these companies have and what the books are saying, could it lead someone to make that assumption?
Well, that's why they send it to FID. That's why they're asking. But I have a problem with that. And let me tell you, I have a real problem with that because the law allows the commission, not the director of investigation. So the director has to go through the commission to get to deal with what the law calls, I forgot the name, will come back to me shortly, some special bodies like the FID, like the DPP, competent authority.
Yes.
That's the word used in the law. For the commission to have a situation where they get information from those authorities. So the tax information, for instance. And the law also permits the commission to have a cooperative relationship with public bodies, including, and any person, including these competent authorities. So I have a difficulty with this. That should have been done during the course of the investigation itself, so that this report would be not a report in limbo, but a report that either you're prosecuting or there's no evidence.
So you're saying that based on the fact that the report wasn't able to cooperate with all of those to get that information in, that's one of the reasons why it might be seen as inconclusive.
Well, definitely. Let me tell you. So I have a problem with, let me tell you what I really have a fundamental problem with. The commission fails to engage public authorities, competent authorities, during the investigation. And then it comes and it says, we can't certify you, the thing until FID, but your own lack.
It's forward, back.
That's correct. Your own lack in doing it, you are now using that as a basis to say they must take a decision. The director of investigations, in my respectful opinion, cannot say in his report that make we send go ask FID, make we send go ask Tax Administration Jamaica, make we recommend this. He must say either there are reasonable grounds upon which a recommendation to prosecute
or not. So, in light of what was just said, Germaine, I'm coming over to you with this question. Do you think, in light of all that Clyde has been saying and what we have read from the report just now, that it may be a case whereby the DI or the body is playing, let's call it hot potato. We're playing hot potato. So technically we are passing the buck. No one really wants to be the one to make this final decision.
It certainly does seem so on the surface, prima facie. But I wouldn't draw a conclusion so definitively just now, because the issues are complex. We know, for example, that an MOU exists between the Integrity Commission and, for example, the FID. What is specified in that MOU, albeit an MOU is never a higher body of law as compared to, regular legislation. And so I would want to know what it is that is contemplated in that MOU. What are the terms and how it is and when it is that the Integrity Commission is authorized to engage with, competent bodies like, the FID and TAG. So again, I don't know enough. I have a suspicion. I think I share Clyde's view. Clyde's view that things don't seem appropriate the way they are being manifested here. But I would hold my judgment for now until I get better at.
Permit me, Kwame, just to read a section of the Act. Permit me.
Go on.
Yes.
Section 7, subsection 1, speaking about the powers of the Commission. Remember, not the directors, the Commission. The Commission may, in the performance of its functions, work in cooperation with any person or body as it may deem appropriate. That's very, very wide. The Commission can even go further and go to court and ask the court to make an order that you give me the information I need. The Commission, and I'm going to read this other section, section 9, subsection 10. Notwithstanding any provision to the contrary under this Act or any other law, a competent authority shall disclose to the Commission any information or document that is necessary to assist the Commission in the investigation and prosecution of offences relating to acts of corruption, financial crimes, and revenue collections.
So Clyde, based on what you have read, are we to understand as John Public that the organization has been so empowered to do what is required prior to putting together this particular report? So pretty much starting here and then going backward.
Kwame, I have a problem where the Commission says we can't finalize until FID say what it has to say. This should have been done. FID should have been involved because the competent authorities are the following.
Yes.
They're specific.
DPP.
The DPP, Attorney General, Tax Admin Jamaica, FID, MOCA, Major Organized Crime Anti-Corruption Agency, Revenue Protection Division, Jamaica Constabulary Force. These are the competent authorities that the IC, the
you listed about
Commission,
7 a while ago.
could ask for information that they consider relevant to resolve, say, for instance, the nil tax issues.
Germaine, question now, in light of all that we have just said, we just organized, or we just uncovered that there are 7 competent authorities with which this organization has the opportunity to collaborate so that they can put together the findings. Now, based on the fact that we now have a report before us that is saying that we have to go back to 1 or 2 or more of those competent authorities now, does it not serve to put the Commission in a light that is less than desirable or less than favorable then? Because it seems as though they are not doing what they ought to be doing the way that they ought to be doing it.
It certainly does. And a part of what is a sort of a noose around the Commission's neck, really, proverbially speaking, is the fact that, for example, the gag order, which has also caused a hemorrhaging of its own reputation over time, the fact that, the Integrity Commission doesn't communicate very clearly, very consistently with the public at large. I think it's just creating a very bad optic for the people of Jamaica. And I think this whole saga, complex, sordid as it is, just does not help at all. So I can imagine, and I've heard a lot of persons just saying, the IC, them to shut them down. Of course, I don't share that view. I share the view that we ought to be looking back at the legislation, see what needs to be amended, what needs to be enforced.
And see how we can empower them.
It is a new entity, and therefore, necessarily an entity of this nature will have teething pains. That's not to say that you're accepting the deficits, but of course you have also to recognize the very important role that it serves within the broader national sphere.
May I come in on this, Kwame? Conceptually, I'm not referring now to the specific instance, just conceptually. I have a problem with this model.
So I want you to hold that point because this sounds important, but we want to go to our break. Continue to watch us. You're watching The Conversation, where I'm speaking with political commentator Germaine Barrett as well as attorney at law Clyde Williams. Continue to stay with us. Welcome back to The Conversation. Just before we went to the break, you were on the middle of a point, and I want you to complete that point because I have some questions.
I want to pick up from Germaine. Thanks, Germaine, for weighing in and supporting having an integrity institution in the country. I don't believe the model that we have is workable, this commission. The commission is a servant of the parliament.
Yes.
So you're pretty much investigating your boss.
So my question is, should it then be, in light of this whole constitutional reform committee thing, should it be then where we amend it so that it becomes a servant of the courts and not of the parliament?
A servant of the people?
People.
Yes. So yes, similar to the Auditor General being a constitutional institution,
And the
DPP being a constitutional institution, I believe we need to make this body a constitutional institution. Let me tell you, and I'm not now speaking about the situations, conceptually, I don't see any Jamaican career lawyer or, expert recommending you prosecute the chief executive officer of the country anytime at all. I just don't see conceptually how that would work. Somebody rule and say, prosecute the Prime Minister for corruption offences. I'm just saying conceptually, given the hierarchy in the country, unprotected office.
All right, so because that's my question now, is it that we have not rendered sufficient, we have not empowered that particular office and we have not given enough protection to the holder of that particular office, so therefore that individual doesn't feel as though they're in that position to do what is required.
Well, it's a director of corruption prosecution. It's a director of investigation as distinct from the commission. So the model is bad. I wouldn't go for a commission model. I'd go, for instance, for like the DPP. She's in charge of a department. So the person who is going to be calling these decisions would be that person in charge of the agency, right?
Yeah.
Not somebody on the levels, and it would have to be at a person at a certain level, constitutionally protected office.
Yes.
You can't have persons who are not constitutionally protected and so level saying you must prosecute and bring down a government. I'm just saying conceptually, I don't think it's workable, because you could have a situation where the government could actually fall on a recommendation that you prosecute. I don't think anybody in Jamaica is going to be doing that.
So it should not be on a recommendation. It would be, you need more conclusive evidence based on that. So, Germaine, just before we were making some consideration, there are seven competent authorities with which this organization has the opportunity to corroborate constantly, consistently, but they have not done so. Now, we see a report before us, and I'm questioning now the veracity, not the veracity, so to speak, of the report itself, but the fact that they could have gotten this information from everybody else. The question that comes before us is, what are we to do with this particular report, given that we now have to go back? That's one. And two, if you were to give the Prime Minister advice, would it be prudent to say, would it be uncommon or far-fetched for him to say, I'm going to request a judicial review of this entire process, based on the fact that they could have communicated with these competent authorities and they did not?
I think it would be perfectly in order for the Prime Minister to pursue a judicial review on this matter. There are a significant amount of concerns out there in the public about how it is that the Integrity Commission has conducted its affairs. I want to, if I may, respond a little bit to the question asked of my friend Clyde, with respect to how whether or not it is appropriate for us to prosecute, if I understand it right, for us to prosecute the chief executive officer of the country, the Prime Minister. I'm not so much in favor of a model of establishing immunity while holding office. While the Prime Minister holds office. I'm not sure if that's what Clyde was saying.
No, I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
I was saying that to put that pressure on a career lawyer in a country like Jamaica that is so tribalized,
who doesn't have the protection of the Constitution,
have the protection of a Constitution.
I agree. It ought to be constitutionally enshrined, and I think as we pursue constitutional reform, there will be an excellent time to embed it within the Constitution, because right now we're having comments being made. We saw vigorous attempts by the review committee within the Parliament, the Integrity Commission review, about amending the legislation. Now that the matters have gotten to as boiling a point as it is right now, it is not infeasible for a government to take it upon itself to amend and effectively weaken the Integrity Commission out of self-interest. I'm not saying that that's what the Prime Minister's intention is. No evidence of that, but I mean, we have to be careful that we don't allow mere routine legislative operations to weaken a body as important as the Integrity Commission. We ought to be looking at strengthening it and making it more effective. And I agree with you that we really need to enact it within the Constitution.
And I wouldn't call it a commission anymore. No, I want us to get away from the notion, because commissions are really parliamentary institutions
that have been set up for a particular purpose. Correct. And then
none of that. You have a similar thing to the DPP or the Auditor General. You have one person at the helm who will be that person who will be taking these big decisions and have constitutional protection. I don't see anybody 40 years old in Jamaica. Have you ever seen, Germaine, anybody being prosecuted on the recommendation?
Oh, no. Not at all. Not at all.
Germaine, isn't it just interesting? It has never happened.
Absolutely. But you know, a point of maybe a point of departure. I'm comfortable with the directors as we have them, the director of investigation, the director of corruption prosecution, and each level having a role to play within the whole ecosystem, as opposed to enshrining that responsibility or embedding that responsibility within one person, because that leads to a degree of manipulation of a process that is so susceptible to manipulation. I like the idea of separating the roles.
I accept that, Germaine. I accept that idea. What I'm saying is, I'm accepting that idea. It's very crucial to have a Chinese war between investigators and the prosecutors. Otherwise, you're going to prosecute based on how you investigate. Very, very important for justice and fairness and so on. What I'm saying is, the ultimate decision as to whether we must prosecute the chief executive officer or a minister
should not rest
with
somebody like that.
It must come up and then come up to the level, and then that person will look at all of the work that has been done and say yes. That's how the DPP at this point can decide to either prosecute or not to prosecute. Similar to that.
Is that how not within the office of the director of corruption prosecution? If she were to rule that there is a case here and the Prime Minister is to be prosecuted, doesn't the Prime Minister then get prosecuted?
No, well, it's a recommendation.
It's a recommendation. It's not. Whoa.
Because it would then have to pass on to the DPP.
There would be a ruling. There would be a ruling that there would be sufficient evidence upon which you could prosecute, right?
Yes.
The decision as to whether we actually go ahead with the prosecution, I haven't really investigated the nuts and bolts of that part in time. What I do know is that has never occurred.
So could it be then that given this, if that recommendation is made, then that will then lead to an investigation or where you weigh the evidences that have been presented to you, and based on your findings, then you proceed with that prosecution?
Well, remember, the director of investigations would have had to determine that there is a reasonable basis
on which
to make a recommendation, or I think they call it a referral at that point, a referral to the corruption prosecutor to decide how they want to decide.
So all the issues seem to be connected since we have been looking at it, the constitutional reform process and this now, because I think, personally, this is now showing the underbelly or the inconsistencies that currently exist with the model that we have. And so it is now giving us an opportunity to see what kind of changes are being made. So yes, it's negative for the powers that be, in this case the Prime Minister, but it is a teachable moment for us.
It is. But I come in, Germaine, I don't want us to just be stuck on legality and criminality and charging and prosecution, because governance is not to be measured by whether or not you have committed a crime. There is what we call public morality and ethical questions in governance.
So then the question that you have just placed in reminded me that I needed to ask now, are the calls, because based on the fact that there's no conclusive findings there, is it just for us to say that the Prime Minister should step aside because he has not been charged? There's nothing to say that a criminal offense has taken place, nor is there any intent for that to happen. So why are the calls being made? And
I'm going to speak quickly because I want Germaine. I think he has a lot to say on this particular point.
Yes, he'll get to do that right after the break.
So here's what I'm saying. There is morality in government.
All right, so hold that point, morality in government. Continue to stay with us. We're going to our final break. You're watching The Conversation. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the conversation. Just before the break, you started talking about morality, and I want you to continue on that point.
Governance and government and our representatives, the standard that we must hold them to is not a criminal standard. It's a lower standard. It's a lower standard. It's a standard of ethics. It's a standard of values and morality. So, for instance, let me read one little bit, here about the capacity to earn. The DI says, Director of Investigation, the circumstances surrounding the alleged use of funds belonging to Positive Jamaica Foundation by Mr. Holness as a partial source of funds for a purchase of a bond in his name. So there is a foundation that is driven for charity purposes.
And he has used that money.
Some of it.
It would appear.
Yes, that's what he said.
Some monies have been used to purchase a bond. That's a personal thing now because it's purchased in his name.
And also the fact that the mismatch between capacity to earn and the monies in accounts. I yield to my friend.
That's based on how we defined illicit enrichment earlier.
That's how typically it would be defined.
How would you weigh in on these points that have been presented, Germaine?
Yeah, I want to clarify an earlier point I made. I hear the opposition and several other persons, even within civil society, calling for the Prime Minister to resign with immediate effect.
Yes.
No. I think it's a little premature for that kind of demand. I think the matters are so complex and there's just so much uncertainty and lack of clarity, even coming out of the IC report, that I think a little time needs to be allowed, a little bit more engagement. The Prime Minister himself needs to give the people of Jamaica more information. And I think at some point in time, almost organically, you'll get to a point, as happened with Bruce Golding, with the Manat, Phelps and Phillips issue, where public morality will rise to a crescendo. Will
prevail.
Such that people meet the demand and the Prime Minister, in good reason, will make the decision if that's the decision to be made, to resign. Now, I want for it to be understood that there are several complicated matters here. Clearly, we're up at an election.
Yes.
The Prime Minister, his party must be making assessment as to the extent to which their political fortunes are hemorrhaging at this point in time and make the right call. But what I want us to understand is that the office of the Prime Minister and Jamaica's reputation at large must be maintained and must be preserved.
Approach.
Yes, cannot be. We can't go back to the days when, for example, we're grey listed. I mean, I know the connection to this matter and that outcome is probably
far.
Distance is far, right?
Yes.
But it's things like these, over time that create a sort of public perception within even the international community. Jamaica's sort of been like a banana republic. So even if it is that the Prime Minister knows that he's innocent, he needs also to be mindful of the kind of mental strain that this is placing on him, given the enormous responsibility that he has to lead the country. And I don't know that if this is a major distraction for him, if it's worthwhile him staying on and fighting while maintaining the office of Prime Minister.
So what I've pulled from what both of you are saying is not just important to be right. It's more.
Yes.
It's also important, or equally as important, to be seen as being right in terms of how we manage. Now,
absolutely.
We also looked at, well, there's something in the air that states that, or shows that the Prime Minister has sought to pull his lawyers together, or his legal team rather, to look at the PNP, the People's National Party, for defamation.
Yes.
Is there grounds for such an action to be taken?
Well, I'm not going to second guess the Prime Minister's lawyers, right? I have seen the papers and so on that they have, and information that they have. What I will say to the opposition, there is a reason why you have a tool called a no confidence motion as a parliamentary tool that we use for check and balances on the executive. If what they were talking about at the press conference was part of a debate in the parliament, they wouldn't be now facing any legal action. And it is precisely for this reason why Westminster adapted systems have that tool where you move. It's not whether or not you win the vote. You're going to lose the vote as the opposition. But the debate brings the information in the public's face and forces the other side to have to decide how they're going to respond and reply. And it goes down in Hansard, and there's absolute privilege.
Germaine, can we state, based on what Clyde has just said, that the opposition is playing politics, but they're not doing a good job at it just now, in light of what was just said?
I mean, I think they're just sort of generating a lot of noise and contention at a time that I think we ought to be studying the issues a lot better.
Smoke screen.
And understanding and making reasonable demands. As I said before, I don't think the demand for the Prime Minister to step aside at this point in time is a reasonable one. You know, I don't. Clive seems to have read the entire report. I have not. All the other things
that's Clyde for you.
To work related and so forth. So I appreciate the insights, Clive. But,
Blessed love.
Yeah, I think I would want. I'm generally conservative in terms of making declarations as concrete as the ones that the opposition are making. But of course, they are motivated in ways that I'm not.
Yeah. So
two terms without any executive power.
So let's move. Let's segue a little now, Germaine and Clyde. We just saw the PNP conference. And it was entertaining, to say the least.
Yes.
And we saw vibes. We saw vibes on stage, you know. And it begs the question, though. A chess game is being played here, and we don't know who is pulling the strings. We don't know if it's the entertainer that was on the stage or the political party that invited him. Who is doing what, and how does this look? How does this look to civil society, of which you're a part, Germaine, and from your perspective, Clyde? And if you can go a little further to say what the outside might be looking in and thinking.
Well, let's remind ourselves of the basic facts, okay? These men were charged, including cartel, with homicide, murder. After 60-odd days of trial, just before summation, there is an allegation of bribery, of an attempt at bribery. One juror trying to bribe all the other jurors. That juror eventually was convicted of bribing, right?
Yes.
The judge calls a meeting in chambers. DPP is there and others are there, and DPP takes the position that the trial could continue, fairly continue. They continue the trial. It ends up in appeal. It goes to the Privy Council. 13 years have passed. It goes to the Privy Council, and the Privy Council says they should have stopped the trial at that point because the jurors who rejected the bribe, all of them rejected the bribe, would then be predisposed to might decide the matter not on the evidence but on the attempt to bribe them. So they would overcompensate.
So they might presume guilt where there's none.
That's correct.
Okay.
So the circumstances in which they benefited from their Court of Appeal in Jamaica, because the Privy Council says, go back to the Court of Appeal to decide if there must be a fresh trial. And that's always going to be problematic after 13 years, to find the witnesses and so forth and so on. The Court of Appeal says it wouldn't be fair to have a retrial. The point I'm making is that they benefited, the defendants benefited from a situation engineered towards the end of the trial by persons. Well, I would say those persons couldn't be acting on behalf of the prosecution.
Yes.
Because they're bribing for acquittal. So fast forward now. So that's the circumstances.
13 years.
For a political party to stamp and elevate to your platform at your one in every year conference on the final day public session, where the audiences are multiple, party, people, opposition,
everybody,
world, and so on, to bring on stage someone who, the context I just defined, not good optics, bad judgment, especially when you're referring to some of the things that we have been plagued with in the country.
But good vibes, though.
Yes, but you expect your government in waiting to have better judgment. That's what you expect, to have better judgment. So for me, I think it's a smart move on Cartel's part, because he has got a political party as part of the process of his rehabilitating himself in the country as a whole. He has a concert in December. So he has one political party,
yes,
possibly the government,
who could
become the government, who says, hey, vibes, welcome back, my brother.
So that was a beautiful game of chess on his part.
I think he's the winner, actually, in the process. And I'm not saying that he should not be readmitted to society.
No, we're not in a position to say that.
No, that's not for me to say. I'm just saying a party wanting to form the government, the optics bad.
So, but now, what does that say broadly? So yes, the optics is bad, but is that sending any form of message, though, to John public about what they have decided to do? Is it a case whereby they're clutching at straws, or they don't believe in themselves to have been able to do what is required without?
Yeah, well, I think it's just an unfortunate judgment, misjudgment. It's unfortunate misjudgment because, remember, after the local government election, the PMP had turned itself around.
Yes.
You couldn't see schism anymore in the party. Mark Golding seemed to have gotten up to a place of comfort where the powers in the party are aligned behind him. They got more votes in local government, as in total votes, than they got in the general election in 2020.
Yes.
And the trajectory. He's now, within the margin of error, he's ahead of Holness on a head-to-head.
Yes.
His party points ahead. So that's a judgment, a misjudgment to have done that, because that could then alienate middle-class votes and other votes.
But Clyde, let's be honest. This doesn't seem to be something that is new in terms of the statement of poor judgment on the part of the People's National Party in recent times. We have heard, or we have seen, where they have made other statements or done other things, where persons have used that to say that the judgment is poor, something is wrong right here, and it's not the People's National Party that they're accustomed to.
Right.
So could this just be the new?
No, I wouldn't say it's new. I mean, and I want to just remind of one other judgment. When the party supported Holness, Juliet, the speaker, remember it was that party who seconded the nomination. Okay?
Yes.
The speaker is selected for a term of 5 years. So you don't just change your mind tomorrow when you appoint the speaker. It's like you cast a vote for your PM, you don't just get it tomorrow, you can't get it back. And then fast forward, Golding gets up and then starting to talk that, conflict and she shouldn't be in the office and so on. So you said, but you just supported her. So I would say, I think it has a lot to do with inexperience politically. That you can't just say things and do things quickly. You have to simmer for a while.
But Clyde, there are persons in the party that would have collectively more experience, more public experience.
But they're not the leader and the GenSec. The Golding is in the party functionally since about 2005.
Yes.
And Dayton ran in the election in 2011.
2011.
Relatively young.
So, Germaine, we want you to weigh in on what was just said earlier. We're looking at whether or not the People's National Party, currently the opposition, has been, well, they have been seen, or they have been making poor judgment calls so far. They have been exercising poor judgment. What are your views on all that we have been saying to now?
Well, I didn't hear all that you said. I got knocked off a little bit. But in terms of the Vibes Cartel matter, I think it was a poor decision. So it might have been a populist decision because you saw how the base riled up when Vibes Cartel entered the stage.
But do you think that might stand the chance of alienating middle class voters, though, as Clyde had said?
Well, that is the case. I agree with that, and I also think that beyond the appeal to the masses and so forth, which is, one could argue, is the basic requirement of a political party. A political party, I think, should also aspire to demonstrate moral leadership over the country. Yes. Let me tell you something. Jamaica is beleaguered with crime and violence and lawlessness and the abuse of women and all that kind of thing. And I could enumerate several other issues that plague us as a society. Vibes Cartel, in my estimation, and many others within the dancehall community, are the embodiment of those things that are wrong with our society. When Vibes Cartel tells you that, at a lecture at UA, that his music is not fit for his children to hear, when he comes out of prison recently and on a platform, a Zoom or so platform, a podcast rather, you hear him making abusive comment at a lady in his background. That really just does say to me that he has not changed, he has not been reformed, and I don't think that a political party that is presenting an image of itself being capable of clearing the moral decay that Jamaica is suffering from should be effectively effectively endorsing this man by giving him a platform. I think clearly he should have been allowed to attend the event, but he ought not have been placed on the platform. And I think that's the same thing of Ninja Man when he was paraded on the JLP platform. I think we have to be serious and stop giving the kind of dual messaging that we're doing here.
And I want to just quickly say, some of this is the same kind of, criticism leveled against Omar and Peter when a different set of circumstances when they have attended the funeral of Willie Haggerty and so on. Very different, more low level, because this is not national and so on.
Yes.
So I must confess, I could not believe that it was happening when I saw was happening, because I had heard him recently saying, I'm not growing anybody picnic. People can grow their own picnic. I'm not going nobody picnic. And I'm saying, but you can't be promoting that. You can't be promoting somebody who is saying, me I do what I do, because I'm not responsible for growing nobody picnic. So when me produce my music and thing and the music, this and the music, that people can grow them picnic. That's what he's saying.
Well, all right. Unfortunately, there's not much more we can say on this particular matter. We are out of time now. So, and that's all for this week's episode. A heartfelt and exuberant thanks to Mr. Clyde Williams and Germaine Barrett for generously sharing their insights and wisdom into this episode of The Conversation. We have unpacked the pressing issues surrounding Jamaica's governance and integrity. Remember, informed voices shape our democracy. Stay vigilant and continue to demand transparency from those in power. Do remember to stay connected and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and on X. On behalf of the entire Conversation production team, I'm Kwame Thomas. Let's keep the conversation going. Take care, everyone.